BART is considering having to cut about 70% of their service, which means things like cutting down night and weekend service, eliminating 2 lines entirely, shutting down 15 of their stations, contracting their service back to their 1976 footprint. If BART can't run as much service over the Bay Bridge in the morning, you're looking at 15,000 more cars. You are looking at total gridlock.
So, San Francisco, we have a public transit crisis on our hands. BART and Muni, actually, are in dire straits right now. Both face these massive multi-$100 million deficits. Stations could close, entire lines could disappear, and BART might not run after 9 p.m. anymore. And according to these agencies, it's on voters to decide their fate. 2 upcoming ballot measures could bail them out if they pass. So this week, I'm talking to Garrett Leahy, one of our reporters here at The Standard who covers transportation. I'm also talking to Laura Tolkoff, a public transportation expert and advocate. She'll explain how we got into this mess in the first place, plus what's actually on the ballot and what's at stake if we lose our public transportation.
If you thought that we were in a doom loop before, just wait until it's impossible to get to your office or impossible to get to a conference. Our economy will suffer, traffic will be terrible, and the cost of living will increase.
Emily's out this week, so it's just yours truly tackling big questions about public transit. I'm your host, Jesse Alejandro Cottrell, and this is Pacific Standard Time. Garrett Leahy, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thanks for having me.
A lot of your job is delivering bad news to people. Do you have like a pro strategy for that? Like, do you like lower your voice? Do you like speak with some amount of empathy preemptively? Like, how do you soften the experience of breaking bad news to someone, or you just rip off the Band-Aid with them?
I kind of just rip off the Band-Aid with them.
That doesn't surprise me with you.
I mean,
it doesn't surprise me.
You can imagine that my voice is kind of hard to keep low. And especially on like a train, you kind of can't speak quietly, or a bus, you can't really speak quietly.
You're losing your line. No, you're losing. This line is going to... Oh.
Well, and honestly, people have limited attention spans. They're kind of like, what? Huh? Who are you? Why are you bothering me? Yeah. They have their AirPods in or whatever. Like, you just need to like tell them, like, hey, you're sitting on this bus. It might go poof. What do you think about that? And then they're like, oh, I haven't heard this before. It's like, yeah, let me tell you about it.
So we're here today because you've been doing some really interesting reporting around this crisis facing public transportation in San Francisco and the Bay Area. BART is on the ropes. Muni is too. Like we're hearing that they may cut a number of lines, making it much more difficult for people to get around. Just tell us, like, what is the state of public transit here?
A lot of them are all in kind of a tough spot, and it really comes down to the money because post-pandemic, on a lot of services, people aren't riding the bus or train as much as they used to because remote work has stayed, even as people have, kind of recovered from the pandemic. And that's really hurt some agencies more than others. Muni's recovered a lot more than BART has because Muni is more than just a way for commuters to get around. It's how people in the city also get around, if not just for work, but also for errands, for meeting friends, especially places where there isn't a lot of parking. So they've recovered maybe 70% of their ridership post-pandemic. But BART, their ridership recovery is looking more like 50% because BART, from the get-go in the 1970s, was really meant as a way to funnel people from around the burbs into downtown San Francisco to go to offices and stuff. And that's not going on as much because of remote work that's persisted since the pandemic. So ridership is down. And for agencies that really rely on ridership revenue, like farebox revenue, to fund their operations, they're in kind of a tough spot.
What is farebox revenue?
Oh, yeah. So that's like the agency-specific term for whenever you tap your Clipper card or your credit card or you slide cash into the machine. So whenever you pay for the bus or the train, the money they make from that, they call farebox revenue.
So let's get specific here about the problems that BART and Muni are facing. What are these deficits that they're looking at?
$350 million for BART is the deficit they're looking at. Muni is $307 million.
And so what are the kind of changes that are on the table to address these deficits if they don't get more money? What are they threatening to do right now?
Yeah, some of what they're talking about, like BART has said it could close 15 stations by July 2027. And even before then, in like January, they could have, no weekend service. They could end the trains at 9 p.m. They might have 3 lines instead of 5 lines. So, BART's pretty drastic. Muni has talked about cutting 20 lines and also ending service at 9 p.m. So after 9 o'clock, you'd have to do the sort of OWL service, which is a much, thinner portfolio of Muni routes.
This sounds like a very short-term solution, because if people stop taking Muni, then Muni gets less money in the future. And then it's like a doom spiral here, right? Less ridership leads to less service, which leads to less ridership.
Exactly. Death spiral is how I've seen it termed by other media. But yeah, it's essentially you destroy trust with the riders because you hamstring your own service.
Yeah, and so you've been actually out riding buses and trains over the last few weeks, talking directly to riders about these proposed cuts. What surprised you when you've been out there?
Well, one thing I've found is that pretty much across the board, riders really, the vast majority, had not heard of this. They had not heard about the potential threat of losing, I was talking to people, boarding from stations that could face closures. Hey, this station might close, according to BART, if the tax measures don't pass. Not only have they not heard about the potential service cuts, but they haven't heard about the tax measures.
So, tell us some anecdotes of people you met out there.
The ones that come to mind firsthand are actually the ones I met on BART. A guy was a construction worker, I believe lived in Antioch, and didn't have a car, which to me is wild, because, imagine trying to get around Antioch without a car, right? But he said he used BART, multiple times a week, I believe like every day. Because not only he would get to job sites around the Bay Area via BART, because it starts early, but he'd also go and visit his family in Antioch. So it wasn't just a commuter, shuttle for him. Basically, it's also personal. So there are folks out there who really need BART, and its full sort of schedule.
In one of your stories, I remember you spoke to a woman who used a cane. What was her reaction when you told her what was on the table?
So, this woman I met, she uses a cane, and she's in her 60s. And she was saying, well, for me, like, I live in the Panhandle. I go to, like, Moscone, and I can take the 6 there. And the 6 stops, like, right outside her place. But when I said, well, you could maybe take the 43 and then the 38 and get over to where Moscone is, or, like, get as close as you can down Market. She's like, well, that doesn't work for me, because I'd have to walk too far to get to the 43. So, walking a few extra blocks is not an option for someone like her. And then I actually spoke to a woman who's she's like late 30s, didn't have any mobility issues. She was on the 33. And I mentioned, well, what do you do if you can't ride the 33 from Haight down to Showboy Square? She works pretty close to us. And she said, well, maybe I'll take the 6. I said, oh, that's getting cut too. And she's like, oh, great. So it's like, 1-2 punch of bad news for her.
Oh. But these cuts are not definitely going to happen. So what are the solutions that are potentially on the table to ensure these cuts don't happen?
So really what the agencies have said is these cuts will happen if there aren't these new tax measures passed in November. And it's not even given that they'll be on the ballot, because the way it works for these is they're gathering signatures to get these on the ballot. So backing up, there are 2 measures that would apply to Muni if we look at just Muni. There is a local parcel tax. It's basically a property tax. It's being championed by the mayor, and they are in the signature gathering phase where if they get enough, they can put that tax measure on the ballot in November, and then voters have to approve it. So that's one measure. And then the second one is actually a regional sales tax, and that would fund not only Muni, but also BART, AC Transit, VTA, Caltrain, and a laundry list of other transit agencies around the Bay Area across 5 counties. And so if one or both of those don't pass, Muni is threatening to move forward with service cuts. And then if the regional tax measure doesn't pass, BART and Caltrain are threatening cuts too, including station closures. And it's not even a given that they can cut their way out of the crisis. And BART has even said, well, if we can't make our transit service work safely and stay in the black financially, we may have just shut down BART altogether.
So San Francisco and California, kind of writ large, famously have some of the highest taxes in the entire country. And I, as a taxpayer, I'm willing to pay high taxes because I like the services that are provided here. At the same time, though, it feels like I'm always getting asked to vote yes on a new tax to fund something that's really important. Are we at a place where tax fatigue starts to become an issue here? Like, what are the chances of these ballot measures passing if they do end up on the ballot?
Yeah, well, I talked to like political campaign experts who've worked on like transit campaigns before. They seem pretty confident that the muni parcel tax is going to pass. There's a lot of strong political support. It's led by the mayor. They've got unions on board, and we haven't really seen any major opposition forming yet.
And also, I was reading that San Francisco kind of always passes their tax ballot initiatives, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something they mentioned too in a previous story, which is that San Francisco and Alameda counties tend to be pretty generous to voters when it comes to funding public services via taxes. But the thing is, the regional measure is more of a toss-up because the regional measure has to contend with voters in 5 counties across the Bay Area who may be more hesitant to support a tax, places that maybe are less lefty than San Francisco and Alameda counties. One that was singled out was Contra Costa County. They have some sort of tax measure they're going to vote on in June. And so depending on how they vote on that, we'll see how receptive the general populace over there is to the idea of new taxes. If they shoot it down, that may be a warning sign for the regional measure that BART needs. But if they approve it, maybe that bodes well for how the regional measure will be received over there in the fall.
Bring it back to you personally. What does it mean for you if some of these lines get cut? Is it going to affect your daily commute?
It doesn't affect my daily commute, at least to my knowledge, even though I take 3 buses to get to work, and I do that multiple times a week. I mean, we'll see if they have put this plan forward as the way it works is they have like agency staff suggest to the board of whatever transit agency being like, hey, here's what we think you should do if the measure doesn't pass. So the 38, the 44, or the 9 bus don't show up on the 20 muni lines that could get cut. So at least in theory, my commute wouldn't be affected that much, other than they might run fewer buses on the routes that do survive the culling. So, instead of 10, 12-minute headways during peak commute hours, it would maybe be like, double that. I mean, they've talked about as long as like 30-minute headways in some buses. So it might take longer for me to get to the office, but I can still do it. I just have to wake up a little earlier, plan ahead. But there will still be a bus for me, presumably.
Laura Tolkoff, welcome to Pacific Standard Time. Introduce yourself to our listeners and talk to us a little bit about your area of expertise and the kind of work you do.
Sure. My name is Laura Tolkoff. I'm the Transportation Policy Director for an organization called SPUR. SPUR has been around in the city for more than 100 years, working on urban policy issues through research, education, and advocacy. So we work on the built environment and good government. So housing, transportation, land use, the economy, and how to make our government function as well as possible.
Was there a moment in your life where you were like, public transportation's super important to me because I use it, because the people I love use it, and then you decided that this needs to be a part of your life's work?
So I grew up depending on my parents to drive me everywhere until I went to college and found myself using AC Transit to get around the Bay Area and BART to get to my internships. Having the experience and the freedom that came with being able to take transit and get where I needed to go on my own gave me a big sense of independence, and just it became a huge part of my life ever since.
What's your favorite thing to do when you're like alone on the bus? What do you do with your time?
Well, don't we all scroll a little too much?
So one of the reasons we wanted to bring you on today was to talk to us more about the kind of historical context. Like, why are Muni and BART in such a dire financial situation all of a sudden? Is it just because of like low ridership? Is this like a pandemic hangover, or are there other factors here at play?
First off, California funds its transit systems in a way that is pretty different than anywhere else that you might encounter transit around the world. Most funding for transit is actually generated locally through things like local sales taxes. In the Bay Area in particular, our regional transit agencies like BART and Caltrain have been heavily dependent on fares to run their systems. That means that they actually had very little public subsidy, and there was always a vulnerability in that. But the pandemic is really what took things to a whole new level, where the thing that made BART and Caltrain the envy of almost every other transit agency in the country really became our Achilles heel. So because ridership dropped precipitously in March of 2020, we saw huge drops in revenue. The fact that remote work is still very prevalent in the Bay Area means that they're continuing to have lingering fiscal impacts at BART.
I got to back up. You said our rail services here are the envy of public transportation systems around the country. Like, I didn't know that.
So prior to the pandemic, our transit agencies, like I mentioned, got most of their operating revenue from fares, which means that they, again, don't rely on that much public subsidy by comparison. And so that is seen as a marker of success. The other thing is, if you look at the last decade and the time before the pandemic, ridership was dropping around the country. It was the Bay Area that was the exception to the rule, where we had crush loads on BART, standing room only on Caltrain. Our Transbay buses were full to the brim. And so we actually had far more success in the last decade in terms of ridership and productivity and financial sustainability than any other agency outside of New York MTA.
Have we ever been in this kind of crisis before with Muni and BART? And I ask you this because it feels like what BART is saying especially is that, like, we might shut down all of BART. Like, this could be the end of BART, which I don't think I've ever heard them say that before. I know in the past it sounds like they've needed our money for various things, but is this like a new existential crisis that they've never seen before?
It's a new existential crisis. I think BART and Caltrain are in pretty similar fiscal positions when you look at the scale of their operating deficits relative to their operating budgets. So we're talking about 35% shortfalls for BART, 40% for Caltrain, and both of them are talking about a process of closing down. There have been times in California where we have lost our transit systems. Los Angeles is quite famous. There's been movies about losing the yellow car network.
Rabbit.
There you go. Even AC Transit is the result of losing the key system. Different circumstances, completely different circumstances. But this truly is a new challenge that they're facing.
We were just talking to one of our reporters, Garrett Leahy, about a couple of ballot measures to save Muni in San Francisco and BART in the region. Can you tell us a bit about what these measures will do and who's out there supporting them right now?
There are two measures. There is one that is San Francisco only. That's called Stronger Muni for All. The second is called Connect Bay Area. Connect Bay Area is a 5-county measure that will appear on the November 2026 ballot if it qualifies. Now, if it does qualify and if it passes, it would raise roughly $1 billion a year for the region's 4 largest operators: Muni, BART, Caltrain, and AC Transit. Connect Bay Area is a half-cent sales tax in 4 of the 5 counties. So it would be a half-cent levy in Alameda, Contra Costa, San Mateo, and Santa Clara, and 1 cent in San Francisco. It would be for 14 years. So it's not a forever tax, but it really is meant to stabilize and improve our regional transit systems. Now, Stronger Muni for All is just in San Francisco. So if you are a voter in San Francisco, you might see 2 measures on the ballot to save Muni. And really, both of those do have to pass in order to save Muni from collapse.
So some people have criticized these measures, saying that the transit agencies could be more cost efficient and still provide good services with reduced revenue. Is that a valid argument from your point of view? Like, is that a way forward for BART and Muni?
No. The reality is that rail agencies in particular have high fixed costs. The costs don't scale with the amount of service that you provide. So we believe that it does not work to just cut service down to the bone. Cutting service actually drives away riders. It reduces your operating revenue and just creates this downward spiral. So it will just create a bigger hole.
So I know that your focus is on sustainable transit systems. If these ballot measures pass, will that sustain these transit agencies for the foreseeable future? Is it like problem solved, or is it just like a Band-Aid until we end up in the next crisis?
I think it's important to remember that these two measures would provide funding for 14 years to sustain operations. It really is intended to make the agencies whole so that they can sustain their service. But that's not the only leg of the stool. So the other thing that's part of this measure is really a mandate for the transit agencies to become more efficient. Over the past couple of years, Muni and BART and Caltrain have all been looking really hard at their revenues, but also their expenses, and have made a lot of difficult choices that help them control their costs. BART, over the last 5 years, has saved over $600 million because of some of the choices that they have made.
Oh, wow.
They, as part of the law that authorize these measures, are required to undergo a third-party financial efficiency review. That has already started, and it will ramp up if the measures pass.
You spoke about how in the past, Los Angeles lost its rail service, a situation that was famously depicted in Roger Rabbit. And in that movie, the villain is cars, is freeways. And we are famously a car culture in California. Is there like a chance that we could steal from New York's playbook and do something like congestion pricing in San Francisco that would kind of tax people to like force them to take public transportation? Like, is that a political third rail in California where that's just like not a possibility at all in a place like this?
Well, slight reframe.
Yeah, sure.
If I may.
Yeah.
I think congestion management is a really effective strategy, but the top goal is really adopting every other economic system that we have, which is charging a fee to go certain places with a car in order to shift demand. How do we use our road space more effectively in a way that makes people's lives better by reducing how much they are sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic, by improving air quality, by improving travel times. And so I think it's really encouraging to see New York having adopted a congestion management program and that it is working so well. I think it is really instructive for San Francisco, which has twice started walking down the path of considering congestion pricing and abandoned it. So I hope that San Francisco is paying attention to it and seeing that, it has a lot of positive benefits and that those far outweigh the cost.
It's a kind of a fun game in San Francisco to criticize Uber and Lyft and Waymo for any number of reasons. But one of the reasons that people often criticize those services is they say that's taking away money that could potentially be going to public transit. It's crowding our streets. Like, has the advent of rideshare negatively impacted public transit's ability to survive?
So there's pretty limited data on how TNCs impact cities, but San Francisco actually has quite a bit and has done a lot of analysis and study about this. And generally what they have found is that, yes, it does contribute to more traffic because you have vehicles that are waiting for their next passenger. You also do have them pulling riders off of transit to some degree. Those services are convenient. I use them myself, but they do have a negative impact on overall system efficiency that I think sometimes gets ignored.
Do you have a sense at all as to whether or not the population in the Bay Area wants public transportation? Are we invested in our public transit? Do we want it?
I think there are some loud voices that don't like transit and will find lots of ways to try and tell you that it's not worth funding or that it's an antiquated technology. But those voices are, they're often the people who don't need transit because they can literally take a helicopter to work if they wanted to.
We're talking about very wealthy people right now.
Yep.
Is that who you're talking about? Okay.
The other 99% of the population still needs transit. Here, I think, are the actual facts about how the Bay Area feels about transit. 85% of people in this region say that transit is very important to them.
That's some recent polling.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is from October. That's up 5 points from just a few years ago. That's certainly a reflection of more people coming back to work and the all-day traffic that we have seen. 87% of people who responded to a BART survey said that BART is important to their quality of life, even though only 50% said it's important to their daily life. And so I think that's really important because it shows that people do understand how important BART is for things like alleviating traffic or cleaner air, making our communities better, making it more affordable and convenient to go occasionally to a Giants game or a Warriors game or a concert in San Jose. Twice as many people take BART from the East Bay to San Francisco during peak commute times in the morning. And so you have to imagine that if BART is forced to do what they are expecting to do, which is slashing service, closing stations, eliminating 2 of the 5 lines, you can imagine what the Bay Bridge would be like. It would have to absorb at least another 14,000 cars in the morning, and it would be terrible. I think we have to remember that this is really a key part of what makes the Bay Area the Bay Area.
So you said before that we used to be the envy of the country because we had this funding model that so successfully depended on fares. Is this model still the ideal, or should state and federal government play a larger role in funding BART and Muni?
The answer is yes and yes. If you've ever traveled outside of the country and experienced transit that just wowed you, that system probably got at least 50% of their operating revenue from their state or national government. In most places with high quality transit, you are going to have the state or national government provide steady, reliable funding to operate the services and a competitive process for capital improvements. We tend to have the reverse of what you see around the world. Our federal government does not put a lot of money into public transit, and when they do, it is on capital projects. The state does put a pretty decent amount of funding into transit, but again, it is capital dollars. In the last few years, the federal and state governments have provided temporary relief funding for operations. We were part of the coalition that won $1.8 billion in temporary funding for transit. It will prop us up through the end of this year, and after that, we have to find a replacement source. The reality is, we would love to see the state put in a lot more operating funding into transit, but it's not going to happen by January 2027. And so for the time being, we do have to save ourselves.
So let's do some imagining. These ballot measures don't pass in the fall. Where does that leave us? Like, how would that impact the Bay Area if these ballot measures failed?
What we will see is really significant service cuts. BART is considering having to cut about 70% of their service, which means things like cutting down night and weekend service, eliminating 2 lines entirely, shutting down 15 of their stations, contracting their service back to their 1976 footprint, so no more airport service. Caltrain is doing the same. So the first to go will be their weekend service. No more trains after 9 p.m., running trains once an hour in each direction, and cutting service at numerous stations. You have huge impacts for roughly the third of the population who does not or cannot drive, who will be cut off from their friends, their family, their ability to live independently and be part of our society. More than 60% of all BART trips start or end in downtown San Francisco. If BART can't run as much service over the Bay Bridge in the morning, you're looking at 15,000 more cars. You are looking at total gridlock. And so if you thought that we were in a doom loop before, just wait until it's impossible to get to your office or impossible to get to a conference, right? There's also a lot of concern about costs and cost of living in the Bay Area, and rightfully so. And things are going to get a lot more expensive. You're going to have people who, because they cannot take BART, they'll take a ride-hail service that's going to cost 10 times more for that same trip. Our economy will suffer. Traffic will be terrible. the cost of living will increase. And so I think when I talk to people about these measures, Connect Bay Area, the 5-county measure is going to cost people less than $5 a month per person. And when you hear that, you think, well, that's totally worth it to me because I will pay so much more to get over the bridge if I have to drive and park my car in San Francisco.
Well, all right, you've scared the hell out of me. This vision of a life without BART and Muni. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today. Laura Tolkoff is the Transportation Director at SPUR, the SF Bay Area Planning and Urban Research Association.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's our show for this week. Pacific Standard Time is a production of the San Francisco Standard. This episode was produced by Eddie Sun and Tessa Kramer and edited by Sophie Behrman. Mixing by Michelle Lands, video by Morgan Ellis, and art by Jess Hutchinson. I'm your host, Jesse Alejandro Cottrell. One note, next week's episode will drop a day later than usual on Saturday, April 11th. The best way to support this podcast is to become a San Francisco Standard subscriber, which you can do by visiting sfstandard.com/member. See you next week.